All right, today I want to talk about some basic things about Islam and some basic things about Arab people. I hope you've been picking up on some of that. Our book that has to do with Arab people and sort of what they think, how they live. That's our Nidell book. As you're reading that, that's going to give you cultural insights. That's part of the reason I am asking you to read it. So I thought I would do something that I've done before, or in other classes, or for other reasons. But I think it's good to be a good introduction to Islam and to the Arab people. Okay? So as we said, not all things in the Middle East are about Arabs, but they do play a major role. So the world of Islam then, the Arab people, you can actually, sometimes there's some question as to where the Arab people came from, what is their history, and so forth. So that's what I want to try to at least address in a cursory manner today. The Arab people are Semitic people. What other people are Semitic? Jews are Semitic. Yes, and there's some others too, but those are the two biggest groups, right? Semitic. Now, we name people by their anthropologists, historians, and others who try to group people, who try to get a handle on people and cultures, tend to do that by their language. Language is one of the main ways that you group people into different categories, which does not involve political boundaries, that sort of thing. Now, typically language is related to your geography and where you are, and often can be related to your politics or your sort of government, but not always. And so it's best, I think, to group people together by their language. I don't think that should be shocking, because if we can't communicate, if we can't speak, if I'm up here talking and you don't understand me, which I think must be the case much of the time when I'm talking by the assignments and papers and questions I get, it's like, wait a minute, I just said that, didn't you? No? Okay, I'll say it again. So, but we have to communicate. If we can't communicate, then we can't share thoughts, we can't share ideas, we can't really share very well our culture, our religion, whatever you want to group into all that. So language becomes the key. The Arabs speak a Semitic language called Arabic. The Jews, Hebrew. Hebrew and Arabic are really pretty closely related, to be quite honest. Quite closely related. And a lot of the words are very similar. Sometimes just a different vowel, different pronunciation. Sometimes the words are pretty much identical. Okay? For example, the word for Shemesh, which means sun, and Shamash, which also means sun. Okay? So the word for water, the word for father, the word for a lot of common words are pretty similar in that way. And the grammar works in a similar way. So we won't go into all of that because this is not a language class. But that's true. Now, how long, what early references do we have to Arabs? In fact, Herodotus, you were talking about Herodotus Society, right? We get that name Herodotus Society because of the early Greek historian. Some people say he's the guy who started the discipline of history, the first historian. Some people might argue that, but certainly he writes a very early history, 5th century BC, and he also writes about a lot of things all around the Greek world. One of the groups of people he mentions are Arabs. He mentions this in the 5th century BC, and they were not a new group then. These people have been around for a long time. Now, you can see the picture that's up there, the picture that's on the screen right now, is of a place in Jordan. Right? Everybody know where it is? Yeah. Petra. Yes. Oh, have you been there? You have. When did you go?
In the summer of 2016.
Summer of 2016.
Yeah.
And who'd you go there with?
I went with Destinations. It was like kind of masked as like a study, but it was like billed as a mission, so we worked with missionaries.
Oh, I see. Okay. Interesting. Well, yeah, I've been to Petra many times. I went there last summer. And by the way, when you guys join me on the excavation this summer, then we could go, if you want, to Jordan. And we could go to Petra. I mean, if you go to Jordan, you should go to Petra. If you just have a short amount of time, that could be the only place you go, because it is a very special place. I think you would agree. And this, yeah, when you said it was the monastery, then I knew you must have been there, because most people don't know this from Petra unless they've been to Petra. But you're right, that is the monastery, and you got to hike quite a little ways to get up there.
900 stairs.
How many?
900.
900, but who's counting? Who's counting? Yeah, you got to climb a lot of stairs. When I went there last summer, I had 2 students with me, and we just had a short amount of time. We got into Petra, I don't know, probably early in the morning, 7, whenever they first let us in. We were out of Petra by noon, and we were walking the whole time. One of the guys had the thing, I don't know, on his phone or on his watch, and said that we walked something like, I don't know what it was, 11 miles or something, 10 miles. And then we went up something like 140 floors, stuff like that. It counts the elevation, change in elevation. And what we did is, of course, we walked through the entrance, we walked all the way in, we walked through the site, and then we walked all the way up to the monastery, and then we walked back, and then we walked all the way out. We did all that in about, I think it was maybe 4.5 hours. It was a lot of walking. And I did it. I'm still alive. Been a while since I'd hiked up to the monastery, and I could kind of tell the difference. I don't like to admit it. Well, anyway, this is a special place. And if you've watched the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which I think is the best one. I think it's the best one. Well, you may disagree, but at any rate.
Skull.
What's that?
The 4th one. Okay.
The skull?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't really like the skull thing. I didn't really like that. I didn't like the way it ended. But anyway, that's okay. I still think the 3rd one's the best. That's just me. You don't have to agree. But anyway, as I've often said, Indiana Jones is the patron saint of archaeologists. So whatever he does, I'm all for it. So this city, Petra, was the capital of a kingdom known as the Nabatean Kingdom. The Nabatean Kingdom. And the 3rd Indiana Jones movie has a chunk of it set in Petra. And so that's what a lot of people used to know Petra from. If they hadn't known it before, they knew it then. So if you know that movie, they end up going looking for the Holy Grail. And when they go back into this red facade, basically what it is, they meet a monk back in there, right, or a knight, and the knight has the thing. Well, I don't want to give it away. Spoiler alert. If you haven't seen that movie from like 1989 or whatever it was, if you haven't seen it yet, don't want to wreck it for you. But that made people aware of this. But the Nabateans were a very powerful and wealthy kingdom of Arabs. And they ruled Saudi Arabia, the coastline. They ruled Jordan. And they ended up having all the way up to Syria, certainly all the way up to Damascus. If you read in the New Testament, you will read that when Paul is there, they talk about a ruler of the city of Damascus named Aretas. I believe it's Aretas the Fourth, but you have to look it up. Mentioned in the book of Acts. That is a Nabatean ruler. All right, so we don't have time to talk about that right now. But in other words, Arab people are mentioned in the Bible more than once, Old Testament and New. They're mentioned in ancient Greek sources. They're mentioned quite a bit. Now, this Nabatean kingdom made its money by trade. And that's going to be important because as we talk about Islam, the early Arab and those who became early Muslims were involved in trade across the desert. Now, the other thing that we think about when we connected with Arab people, not all Arab people are Bedouin, but Bedouin are an important part of the population. The Bedouin people are nomadic. I suppose I should technically, if we we're going to be anthropology people, we'd probably call them semi-nomadic. We don't have to talk too much about the difference here, but what this means is they move. They move from place to place. Because they have flocks of sheep and goats primarily, and they need, sheep and goats need to eat, and they need to drink. And so just like here in beautiful Florida, where we happened to get rain last night, which is kind of unusual for the winter. We don't get much rain in the winter, so what I'm finding out, having recently migrated here. So things get kind of dry in the winter, right? And then the rest of the year it's like a rainforest. But in other parts of the world where you go through a cycle of wet and dry, and that's certainly the way it is in the Middle East, very dry, but then there is some rain, they have to move their sheep and goats to where there are plants and water to drink, plants to eat, water to drink. And so that means they move their flocks. Plus, when they bring a flock into an area, it eats up all the vegetation in that area. You got to move them to another area because they're going to eat every day, right? Kind of like you guys, probably you eat most days, I would say. And so sheep want to eat every day. So that's going to affect it. So Bedouin culture, when you read that book by Nidell, it's talking about Arab culture. Arab culture and Islam are influenced by Bedouin culture. And the Bedouin have this semi-nomadic moving from place to place. Also, when you live out there like that on the move, there are some things that you don't do. One of the things you don't do is plant crops. Why? Because you're not going to be around to take care of it. You're not going to be around to protect it or nurture it or maybe even to harvest it, right? So there's not much use, and you don't own any land. The Bedouin really don't own land. They claim land, pieces of land. They go there regularly, probably every year they're moving through. But that means that they will raid villages and towns to get the things that they don't have. This just became part of their culture. Part of that would be maybe grain. Part of that might be wives. They would go into town looking for ladies, right? Because there aren't many ladies out in the desert.
I need more than just look for the ladies.
Well, they would invite them to join their family. Okay, then maybe they would even have to take them on a tour to give them an idea what their new life is going to be like. Yeah, I mean that sort of thing happened. Raiding the village. Now, it happened periodically, and so the Bedouin had a reputation that you had to kind of, if you lived in a village, you weren't necessarily real happy to see all the Bedouin show up, right? Now, there was a somewhat a symbiotic relationship, however, because let's say when you harvested your fields, the Bedouin would then come in with their sheep and they would eat whatever was left because you're going to probably drop some of it. Some of the kernels of wheat will fall on the ground. And as the sheep eat up what's left, they fertilize your field. I won't tell you how that process works, but it's automatic. Let's just say it's an automatic fertilization of the fields. So, sometimes the people are getting along. I don't want to say they're always antagonistic, but at times the Bedouin will resort to raids, and that then also becomes a part of early history of Islam. That's why I'm mentioning it now. All right, probably enough there I could wander about that for a while, but let's move on. Here's some Bedouin. Here's a picture of some camels that I took when I was in Jordan one time at an excavation. I saw these guys, along the road. I stopped to try to talk to them a little bit, see what was going on with the camels. There was a lot of camels. Found out that these guys, although that guy looks like he's about 10, he was really, like 17 or something. These guys.
The camel or the people?
No. Well, I didn't talk to the camels.
Well, I didn't know.
Yeah, that's
Because
right.
that guy does not look 10 or 17.
What does he look like?
For over here, he's like 65.
This guy looks like he's 65?
Over here, a little bit. Look, even Paxton's saying yes. Anyone else?
How tall was the camel?
Okay, thank you.
Just
Wow.
for comparison.
No, that's a little kid. Both of those are young. What?
How tall was the camel? It's like,
Well, camel height.
What the heck does that mean?
Camel height, it's just average height for a camel. Camels are, when a camel stands up, I would, there are different sized camels. I don't know. You want to know like to the top of its head or to the top of its hump or to the top of its knee? I would have to guess. I would say that camel, his head is probably about 6-7 feet high, the way it is there. If he stretches it out, could get a little higher. Camels, and you see a lot of camels in the Middle East, so I guess I get used to the camel. I like the camels, but they don't really like me. Let's just put it that way. Camels don't always like me, but I like them. They're called the ship of the desert. The ship of the desert, because this is what the people would ride on the ship to go across the sea, which is the desert. Okay, what's that?
She said ahoy.
Ahoy, yes, ahoy to the sand. Now, we see that these guys, who, like I say, are 17 or 18, I don't know, you'd have to come up here and look at the kid. He looks like he's about 10, really. But these guys always are older than they look until they get old. Well, yeah, even when they're old, they look older than they are. How's that? So you'll see a guy that's like 35, he'll look like he's 65 or 55 at least. It's hard living. As I think one of my patron saints once said, it's not the years, it's the mileage. You'll have to look up that quote, movie quote, to see who said that. So the camel then, it becomes an important part of the Bedouin life and will also play heavily into, references in the Quran and into the early culture of Islam, because this is the culture they're coming out of. It turns out these guys were from Saudi Arabia. They were bringing the camels, they were sort of hired to bring the camels from Saudi Arabia to Jordan. They're border each other. And why? Well, because it was coming up time for the Feast of Eids, as it's called. Eids. Eids is a feast that they have every year. It's not at the same time by our calendar, because their calendar and our calendar, theirs is lunar and ours is solar. At any rate, we won't get into that right now. But one of the practices of the Bedouin tribes is to eat camel at this feast. That's considered to be quite a luxury, quite a delicacy, very extravagant, because buying a camel is expensive. And then, to kill the camel and to eat the camel, of course, you can't get any work or anything else out of it. And, of course, all the camel is, like they use the skins to make tents for the Bedouin tents. They use the milk of the camel to make a cheese. You can milk a camel. How do you do that? Very carefully. Very carefully. You can, of course, ride the camel, right? So that's what they were doing. They were bringing it, and then I remember I saw there would be like big pens of camels, hundreds of camels. Why were those camels there? They were on what I like to call their final journey, a one-way ticket. So you can make up your own thing. I remember one of the workers, the dig, many years ago, You get to know these guys because I went back to that particular site many times. I don't know, like 6, 8 times, I think. 8 different summers. And you live in the same village, and so you kind of know the people in the village, which I call the village people. And they invite you to their house, and they invite you for dinner. Yeah, well, sometimes you see the village people dressed like, construction workers, Native Americans, police officers, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. But they would invite you to their home. And so I see this guy, I hadn't seen him in a while. I say, hey, how are you doing? He goes, well, I'm good. And as you read in your book, family is very important. In the Nidell book, family is critical in Arab culture. Critical. And that also plays into the early role of Islam as well. So the first thing they're going to ask you about, one of the first things they're always going to ask you about is your family. And you should always ask them about their family because that's just polite. That's just what you do. And so when I asked him, well, how is your family? He said that his mother had died the previous year, several months ago. It wasn't that recent, but I hadn't seen him in a while. And then he told me, I said, well, I was sorry to hear that and so forth. And then he said, well, the feast is coming up. And so my family has purchased a camel for the feast. I said, oh. He goes, yes. And so what they're going to do, let me paraphrase, they're going to butcher the camel. Then they're going to give a piece of the meat of the camel to basically most every family in the village will get a piece of this meat. Family unit, okay? And then when they have their meal on that feast day, they will be eating all from the same camel, and they will remember his mother. It's a memorial. It's a remembrance. I said, oh, I understand. I go, okay. Then I mentioned, do you actually kill the camel yourself? He goes, oh, yes. I said, oh, that sounds interesting. So the next day he brought me pictures. I will not share those pictures with you. But he did bring me photographs of how they do that. If you're interested, I can share that with you. But yeah. And so then he also brought me some camel meat. I wasn't eating it at its best, I think, because it was cold. And it was sort of like a camel meatball is the best way I could describe it.
Was it like chicken, steak?
It was not like either of those things, no.
Goat, fish?
It was like camel. It was like camel. A little greasy. And, of course, like I said, it wasn't its best. It was sort of a meatball. It had rice mixed in with it, I think, and rolled into like a meatball. So I pretty much had to eat that. It's his mother's memorial thing, and he brought it out there especially for me. So I did eat it. So I've eaten camel. Not a whole camel, but some camel. Well, there's some camel. There's a lot more camel stories. I don't have time to tell you all of them. I'm getting hungry. I didn't really have much breakfast. I didn't really had a banana today. That's all I've had. So I'm kind of hungry. So when this class is over, I think I'm going to try to see if I can find anything in our lovely, what do we call it? Nobody calls it what it's supposed to be called.
Everyone called it Chartwell's.
They call it Chartwells, but that's not the name on the building.
Toscana.
Toscana, yeah. So I hear I've had to learn that both of those mean the same thing, even though they're not even closely related. I always pick the wrong thing in there. We got quite a bit of variety. I know people always complain about cafeteria food, but I think we got pretty good stuff in there. But what happens is we got the place here by the door, and of course you got the pizza thing, and then you got the place just past the pizza thing. It's got more hot food. Then you got the grill. Then you got the other hot food over there, next to all that beans and stuff.
Yeah, it's usually like pasta or something.
Yeah, kind of pasta
Then there's like
or Chinese kind of stuff. But here's what happens to me invariably, right? I'll get there and I'll pick the wrong thing. And then, I don't want to waste the food. So I'll get like some kind of weird pasta with weird stuff on it. And then I'll walk by and they're having like some great barbecue chicken or something back in the back. And then I didn't get it. So now I think, well, I don't want to throw this food away. Nobody's going to take my food. So I just got to eat my
So
food.
do you walk around first?
I don't have enough time. And then here's what happens. The good food has a long line, and I can't wait. I don't want to wait. I don't want to wait a half an hour to get my food. So
Do you use a green tray?
I often use a green tray. Yes, I do. Yeah, see, they don't like the green tray. Nobody likes the green. I like the green tray because otherwise I have to make several trips to back and forth, not only to the table, but to get rid of my dishes. And you got to go over there anyway to get the napkins and the silverware, right? So I might as well pick up a tray while I'm at it. Then I go set the tray where I'm going to sit, and it saves my seat.
Well, what are you getting when you put the tray down? So you have everything on the tray?
No,
Isn't that the whole purpose of the tray?
the tray's saving my spot. It's holding my silverware and stuff. And then at the end, when I take all my dishes up, they're on the tray. I don't have to mess with them. Anyway. I don't know how we got into that discussion. But what I'm saying is, I always get the wrong thing, it seems. Or it's a really long line, I don't have enough time. But I have eaten camel. They've never served camel, to my knowledge, in our Toscana restaurante.
I think they're on the endangered species list.
No. Camels? No. No. There's a lot of camels. Oh, did they? You're trying to get me into trouble now. That's a lovely cafeteria, a lovely restaurante. Okay. I endorse it 100%. Now, remember, the Bedouins have a tribal organization. This certainly affects early Islam. So, a lot of the things that I guess I'll just make this kind of statement. A lot of things that I hear people associated with, say, Islam, is really things that are associated with Arab culture. But to be honest, it's hard to separate Arab culture from Islam. They have an influence. Anyway, so there's a sheikh. The sheikh is the ruler of a tribal council. And the sheikh makes the decisions. You might think of the sheikh being kind of like a mayor, let's say, but also like a judge, an advisor. But, there is a council. I mean, there are other elders that the sheikh will consult. They'll have a meeting, but then the sheikh makes the final decision. And when that decision is made, that's it. Okay? So that's what you got to think of. Sheikh has all the power, and that is usually passed down through a family. I knew a man who was a sheikh, and he became the sheikh. His father was the sheikh, then he became the sheikh.
I'm guessing it's different from sheep, or is it the same?
No, same thing. But sheikh is, usually they call it sheikh, instead of sheep.
So it's just like the proper pronunciation.
Yeah, it's the same thing, I guess. Well, they group their tribes in clans. And of course, they use the camels for transportation, they use it for milk, they use it for meat, they use it for shelter. They make tents out of the skins. And of course, the trade. Trade coming across the Arabian desert begins at a very early time, and it's bringing goods that have come from India across the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean, and things coming from India have also come from China. So you might see this. So this is a trade route where mostly it's spices and things, but sometimes other things that are coming across, and they're making their way then across the desert to the Red Sea, to the Mediterranean Sea, and from there, of course, are saved. So the Nabateans, for example, are doing that, which have been done for a long time. We might call them middlemen, in business world. They're getting the goods, and then they're selling the goods, and they make a profit. Okay? But they're also transporting things. So, no drones to transport goods, like Amazon. See, I get nervous when people start flying drones to my house. That's just me. Drones and black helicopters kind of make me nervous. Well, I've noticed since I moved here, I don't live too far from the airport or Lakeland Airport. And sometimes I'll be outside and I'll hear something that sounds like something out of a World War II movie, like a squadron coming to bomb or something. And I look up and sometimes it's an entire, like 15 planes in formation. Yeah, pretty cool. Well, you have that big air show. That's coming up. What do they call it? Fun and Sun, Sun and the Fun, Fun and the Funny Suns? I don't know. Big air show. And the Blue Angels fly right over my house. Now, you might think that's nice. It's pretty neat the first couple of times. But after about 6 days of these guys buzzing your house in formation and are doing wacky stuff and sonic booms and all, you kind of think, time for the Blue Angels to move on. Well, pre-Islamic Arabs live in the Arabian Peninsula, makes sense, but they are polytheistic. They worship many different gods. These gods are often, almost always, represented by some stone effigy, what we might call an idol, a stone representation. Here is one. This is from Petra. This used to be in the Petra Museum. The last time I was there last summer, it wasn't there. I think it's out on some traveling exhibit somewhere. Hopefully someday it will return. But I took this picture one time when I was at Petra in the little museum. They have a nice museum there. Maybe next summer if I go to Petra, I'll let others hike up to the monastery. I might stay at the museum. I need to do a little study. We'll see. Well, I suppose it's good for me to encourage people. And it makes them feel like they're so much better when I'm the last one to get there. So, anyway, so this is one of them. This is actually called Dusaras. You can see on the bottom of this stone thing that there's writing. It's kind of hard to see, but down there at the bottom, if you look carefully, that is an early form of Arabic writing. We call it Nabatean, if you like. And it's written right to left, as Hebrew is, instead of left to right, as, say, English is. And it looks like a blockhead, right? Flat block with eyes and stuff. That is Dusaras, a pillar god, sometimes it's called. It's supposed to represent fertility and that sort of thing. Now, these gods, many of them were collected at a central shrine in Mecca. So what I'm trying to tell you is that Mecca, which I'm sure you know, today is the holiest of cities to the Muslim, was a center of religious activity long before Islam. Okay? And there were many idols, many stone gods, which represented different tribes. Each tribe sort of had its own. There was, I guess there still is, a black stone at Mecca. This black stone predates Islam, and it is believed that this black stone, many people think it's a meteorite, that is, it fell from heaven and was gathered up by people because it's a black stone. You can see pictures of it. Looks to be about the size of a medicine ball, if you know what a medicine ball is? About the size of a medicine ball, I would guess. Pretty good size, meteorite. But the idea here is that this was sent, at least it comes to say, this was sent as a sort of covenant between the Arab people, Abraham, and God. Because the Arabs, the Muslims, claim Abraham as their father as well. Father Abraham has many sons. And many sons has Father Abraham. And the Arabs are one of them. And so are the Jews. So let's just sing the song, however that goes. So, pre-Islamic Arabs, continuing this, stay involved in the trade. The Nabateans, as you can see if you look there carefully, were involved in that trade for about 400 years, 350 years. But what happens in the early 2nd century AD is that the Romans take over Arabia. They take over that trade because they want to make the money. And that's actually, they call it the province of Arabia. So you can look up the Roman Provincia Arabicus is a Roman province of Arabia, and they sort of take over the trade. But as the Romans then declined, when you get, let's say, to the 4th century, things are a lot of troubles for the Romans, but the Arabs come right back in. They're still doing it. They were always doing the trade, but now they control it again. They're getting pretty wealthy, and the trade is growing because they're the ones in charge of it now. A lot of other things have fallen apart, but still people still want these things, and they become quite prosperous. Now, of course, as always, there are conflicts over trade routes. Who controls the trade route? Who controls the water sources that are out in the desert, of which there aren't very many, but they are essential? So this then reasserts the importance of Mecca. Mecca becomes important once again because of this. Let me try to do one more screen here before we go. So here you see an artist's conception of a market, early market. See women carrying stuff in baskets on their heads. See that a lot. I remember one time, this is a long time ago, I saw a woman coming down the road, coming down the street, carrying a television on her head. And this is the old kind of the big televisions used to be big. I don't know if you remember that. But they were big, boxy things, and they're heavy.
They're strong.
And she had this big television on top of her head. She just walking, Or they put baskets, they put all kinds of stuff up there. It's pretty amazing. So that's what they're showing here.
They're strong.
It takes a lot of balance and a lot of strength. But then they're using their hands. Sometimes they're carrying a child or they're carrying other things. They're doing, texting on their iPhone. No, that's... All right, so here's a map, and let me talk about this map for a minute, and we'll end it there. This just shows you now the Middle East, approximately 600 CE, or what I would call AD, same thing. And this shows you basically where Mecca is. You can see it on the Arabian Peninsula. You can see Yathrib there. And then, of course, you can see if I can get this thing to work. Yeah, there we go. There's Mecca. I think that'll show up. And then there's the Yathrib. And then up here, the Sasanian Empire, which are basically Persians. And this over here is the Byzantine Empire, which controls Egypt and Palestine and so forth. That's the Roman Empire. By this time, most people call it the Byzantine Empire. So this is a situation. The Arabs have a lot of territory, but let me tell you, most of that territory has nothing in it. In fact, even the Arabs call this section out here in the Arabian Peninsula the empty quarter. And mostly they live along the coasts. They live close to the coast because that's where they get transportation in and out. That's where usually if there's any water, there's mountains near, you can get some runoff of streams or waterfalls, or even when it rains, they can capture the water because water is a big issue here. So most of the people live along the Red Sea coast. And you see Yemen down at the bottom here, and then Oman's over here. So all around the coast there is some settlement, but it's going that. So there's a lot of square mileage, I guess we'd say, but not much population. And from the time of the rise of Islam, let's say from the time of the death of Muhammad to about 100 years later, they take over a huge amount of territory. All right, we'll leave it there for now. We'll talk to you later.